Okay.
We're going to head into it. Give me a quick moment. Good afternoon, morning, and night to everyone wherever you are. Dagaho. I'm Kimberly, and I'm a volunteer with Save Cantonese. And thank you so much for joining us for How Do You Identify Preserving Cantonese Identity Through Language, Culture, and Heritage, hosted by Save Cantonese at Stanford, Save Cantonese at City College of San Francisco, and HKAAB Hong Kong Affairs Association of Berkeley. And joining us today, we have Brittany Tan from the YouTube channel Cantonese with Brittany, Professor Bourgerie from Brigham Young University, Sunny Jung from HKBC, Andrew Tan from Hong Hong, and Felix, a Cantonese advocate from Guangzhou. And unfortunately, Laurel cannot make this panel today. But I think we'll have a very really interesting talk because all our panelists are of all different backgrounds and experiences with different Cantonese communities from around the world. And so hopefully today's panel would encourage you to think more about what is Cantonese identity, how you preserve it. Thank you for submitting your questions ahead of time. We got a lot, and we have consolidated them into several questions for today's panel. And if you have any other questions for panelists, go ahead and leave them in our Q&A or put them in our chat box. So let's start off with a question for all of our panelists to answer. I'd like you to introduce yourself in maybe about a minute and then answer the following questions. What is your connection to Cantonese? How do you identify? And what does Cantonese identity mean to you? So let me pass this off to Brittany.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Brittany. I'm a content creator who focuses in Cantonese language and culture, and I identify as a CBC, Chinese-born Canadian. And what does Cantonese mean to me? It means family, and it means a place to belong. And yeah, very excited to be here today.
And now let's pass it over to Andrew.
Hello everyone, I'm very glad to be given the opportunity to speak on this occasion. I'm Andrew Chan, a native Hong Konger, a Cantonese and Chinese tutor, and a journalist. I'm also the chairman of Societas Linguistica Hongkongensis, which is an organization that organizes Cantonese-related research and activities in Hong Kong. Glad to see you guys.
Next up, we have Felix.
Hi, everyone. I'm Felix. So I'm a material science student, new grad at UC Berkeley. And I was born in Guangzhou and in a native Cantonese family. So I didn't actually think much about Cantonese until I knew that I was about to come to the US and leave Guangzhou for a long time. And since then, I started to build up a clearer and stronger sense of belonging of the Cantonese culture. Also the language, yeah.
Brittany?
Oh, she already spoke.
Excuse me, Professor.
Oh, yeah, sure. My name is Dana Bourgerie. I'm from Brigham Young University, Asian Near Eastern Languages. And I have a long background with Cantonese, maybe even before some of you were born. I served early. I first went to Hong Kong in 1979 to 81. I served as a volunteer missionary. I worked in Chinatown, LA, and I first got exposed to Toisanese then. I worked with Hong Kong immigrants and also Cantonese, Vietnamese immigrants as well. So that's tied to my work even today in diaspora studies. I have an academic background with Cantonese. I was a Fulbright Scholar at Chinese University of Hong Kong. I did work in Cantonese phonology with the faculty there, and also I worked at City University for a year. And I've taught and developed materials for learning as well. So besides the linguistic interest, I have that. I've worked with 2 learning materials, most recent version of colloquial Cantonese, and also University of Arizona software called just simply Beginning Cantonese. I taught, I see myself, it's interesting, I'm French Canadian, and that's not irrelevant here because it gives me a sort of a different kind of framework to think about complex identities. It's interesting, my family mostly speaks French, but if the ones that don't still consider themselves French Canadian, which is interesting. And I think there's some parallels to that in the Cantonese community too. A lot of people feel strong identity, but they never had the chance to learn Cantonese. Maybe they still can. My children know Cantonese and French because my 2 daughters started school in Hong Kong and Daibo. So I have 2 Caucasian daughters who speak Cantonese. What's my identity? So it's complex. I see in the pedagogical literature, there's something called third place. I don't know if you've heard of it. You're not a native and you're not a regular non-native either. You're sort of a invested third place person. So I'm somebody who cares very much about Cantonese. I have spent a lot of my life trying to promote it, but I don't have Cantonese heritage. So, but it's a place I can contribute in a way that's important. It's a different kind of position, but I felt a privilege to be part in that way.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. It's definitely really cool to see that different perspective. And let me pass it off to Sunny for a quick introduction, what your connection to Cantonese is, how do you identify, and what does this Cantonese identity mean to you?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sunny. I was a student leader in Hong Kong and now also an activist based in the United States. And then Cantonese for me, I mean, normally speaking, I mean, I'm a big fan of Canton pop and also Cantonese movie since I was born in Hong Kong. And then I have been, I mean, practicing Cantonese, of course, and then also trying to, I mean, observing the beauty of Cantonese and how Cantonese, I mean, embedded in our pop culture and in our movie, and that's also like compile our unique identity. So this is, I think this is not just me. I think this also is the basic story of many Hong Kongers in Hong Kong or in overseas. So one of my unique experience, of course, is when I was a student activist, like several years ago, and then actually I also, I mean, work with Andrew here, and then we of course, I mean, but he should be in a better position to comment on that. But yeah, I mean, I'm also a big advocate for safeguarding Cantonese as the primary language that students, secondary school student can be used to learn Chinese, because the Hong Kong government Bureau of Education previously wanted to promote using Putonghua to teach Chinese instead of our mother tongue Cantonese. So I was an activist, I mean, to oppose that, and Andrew also here. And then, yeah, so Cantonese also become very unique for me because I've been using Cantonese to have a lot of political deliberation and dialogue with others. And Cantonese really constitute my unique identity and also the political conversation and discussion for me on a daily basis. So yeah, I mean, I will end here, and I look forward to the further discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, so the first question that we have here that I'm going to pose to Andrew, Sunny, and Professor, because you can kind of put a different view on it, is what is the difference between Hong Kong identity and Cantonese identity, right? And I think it also kind of spans past Hong Kong, past even Guangzhou, Macau, and even kind of into the Cantonese diaspora. So if you guys can speak more to that. And Professor, how about you go first?
Well, sure. You know, I think it's interesting is Cantonese has a more organic position than most dialects, and they've sort of developed, I guess it's ties to another question too. We have a sort of a dual standard of sorts, Guangzhou and Hong Kong, but they're not exactly the same. But it reminds me when I first went to San Francisco, Chinatown, I ran into somebody who I was speaking Cantonese to, and they told me that I had good Hanggonghua, but they speak Cantonese here. And they say, and it's to them, it was Toi Sanwa was the quintessential Cantonese. Our association, our Cantonese Language Association, has taken away any distinction between all the Yue dialects, Cantonese varieties as a whole. So there's no doubt that there's some sort of prestige level going on. You can't fight that completely, but I think it's important to recognize various varieties of Yue dialect and is spoken in different places.
Andrew?
This is a pretty good question because Cantonese is the most dominant language in Hong Kong. More than 90% of Hong Kong people know to speak Cantonese. So it is, for people in Hong Kong, I think it is hard for us to notice the difference. But if we talk with other people who can't speak Cantonese in Hong Kong, we can see what's the difference. Some people in Hong Kong, they don't know how to speak Cantonese, but they still love Hong Kong culture. They still embrace the Hong Kong's values, and they love to listen to Hong Kong Cantonese pop songs and dramas and movies. And these are good. We also like to embrace them as one of Hong Kong people. So this is different. And if you want to notice the difference between Hong Kong identity and Cantonese identity, I think the best approach is to see the difference between Hong Kong Cantonese with Hong Kong characteristic and Cantonese in different regions. You can see the terms, the wordings we use in Hong Kong is pretty different with Guangzhou or Malaysia, and you can see the things inside Hong Kong's Cantonese are really different. So you will know more and more when you explore into the Cantonese with Hong Kong characteristics. You see the difference between Hong Kong identity and Cantonese identity. Like Hong Kong, the values of Hong Kongers is indeed shown in the what they say, what they speak, the language. Thank you.
And now Sunny. And just to
yes, I think this is absolutely brilliant question. I mean, I totally agree with Andrew. I mean, since I was born, every time when I went to Macau or Zhuhai or other places, I mean, in the Guangdong province, we can notice that, I mean, there are some discrepancies between the accent of Cantonese in different places. So I think this, and also despite the accent, also the idioms, the slangs that you use are quite different when you try to compare Hong Kong people and people in Macau, and then also people in Guangdong province. And as a matter of fact, since, I mean, the Hong Kong pop culture was so widespread, especially many people 20 or 30 years ago, they grew up with TVB. They grew up watching TVB. And that's why they also have the opportunity to assimilate their Cantonese culture with Hong Kong characteristic, because TVB was so widespread that many people have to watch the TV dramas, wherever you are. So I would say, as a matter of fact, Hong Kong Cantonese accent or some idioms or slangs that Hong Kong people use might be quite dominant for a while, I mean, within this region. But this does not necessarily mean that the Cantonese with Hong Kong characteristics is much superior with the Cantonese compared with other regions. So the last point I would like to make is that in recent years, there are indeed some people, some activist groups or cultural groups based in Hong Kong would love to correct the naming and the framing of Hong Kong culture. They want to say that we are not merely Cantonese culture, but we are Hong Kong culture. So they refuse saying that we are the Cantonese music. They want to say that, I mean, we are the Hong Kong music. So we are no longer using the Canton pop as the framing, but some people will try to use the Hong Kong pop as the correct framing to describe the Cantonese culture with Hong Kong characteristic. So I think, yeah, this is a trend, but yeah, I will stop here and then and then let other people to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, and kind of a follow-up question that we had in the chat, be if we can give a word or two that is like different between like Hong Kong Cantonese versus non-Hong Kong Cantonese, right? Like fridge, bing serm versus 许怪, right?
Yeah,
And this
and I
question's
think
directed
Felix
to
can tell
Andrew.
some difference about
Well,
it too.
certainly,
Like,
certainly the English borrowings,
mm.
Sizi versus Daisiu, you know.
Yeah, we adapt many English words in Hong Kong's Cantonese, like taxi, basi,
Office E, Seji Lao, you know.
because Hong Kong was British colony, so we adapt it very much, and also you can see the difference between, like, I think it depends on the books we read and makes very more difference. Like in Guangzhou we say turn off the air conditioner, like 關空調, but we say 熄冷氣 in Hong Kong. That makes a lot of difference, but we can still communicate with each other. I can absolutely know what is 關空調 in Guangzhou's Cantonese. So there are many differences, but we can still communicate with each other. There's not much problem with communication.
You know, it's an interesting point. I have two colleagues, one from Guangzhou and one from Hong Kong. And there's they tend to want to locate themselves in a way by those special words. They signal where their connection is by using particularly Hong Kong characteristics or Guangzhou characteristics. And so it's a sort of a subtle political social statement as well.
And also a very, a very quick remark. I mean, adding on that, many people would argue that the difference between Hong Kong Cantonese and Guangdong Cantonese perhaps the Guangdong Cantonese is a little bit more old school in terms of the slangs and idiom they use. For example, I mean, in Hong Kong, many people already complain that they haven't said like 菩薩過江至新南浦, this kind of very old school, very cultural idiom. But perhaps people who remain in Guangdong province or Macau might still use this kind of idioms. Actually, I mean, that will be a pity. I mean, if Hong Kong people lose this kind of idioms and slangs, that we also demonstrate a lot of, I mean, Cantonese legacy and history. But yeah, I mean, some people might argue in this way. I mean, in terms of this kind of slangs and idioms they use. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of leading into like another question is Hong Kong Cantonese like quote unquote the most standard form of Cantonese, and what do Cantonese speakers of different diasporas / regions think of other Cantonese dialects? And let me pass this over to Felix as he's from Guangzhou.
Yeah, I want to comment a bit for the last question first. I see somebody said in the chat that so Guangzhou people used to say lang hei and used to say lang hei and shui guai like 10 years ago, but in the recent 10 years, the Guangzhou Cantonese is heavily affected by Mandarin. So many vocabulary started to lean on the Mandarin side, and also there's also a difference between the English word of Hong Kong Cantonese, like noxi and printa, which I think Guangzhou people normally don't say that. Is that we will say printer is 打印機 and I think Hong Kong people say 影印機, right? And the Hong Kong, I think Hong Kong, the Hong Kong identity and the Cantonese identity are definitely not identical. Like what Andrew have mentioned, some people in Hong Kong are not Cantonese people, and they don't speak Cantonese. But at the same time, the Cantonese people has the largest population in Hong Kong, so that that make the Cantonese identity and Hong Kong identity have a fairly large part overlap. Yeah, and for the second question, I think there's many people think that especially in Guangzhou, people think that the Cantonese in Guangzhou is the most standard one. I don't know what Hong Kong people think about that, but I would say that was a little bit old school. Yeah, because it's heavily affected by the Mandarin, and also the Hong Kong Cantonese compared to the Guangzhou one is more actively used. So the Hong Kong Cantonese have more new words or new phrases coming out every year or even every month. And the Guangzhou Cantonese is still using the same old slang years over years. So that would be different. And I think I would challenge that the Guangzhou Cantonese is the standard one. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then let me now pass this question off over to Professor.
You know, it's interesting. I don't know that there's a standard in the way that Mandarin has a standard where it's codified in the education. Although I'd argue often that Mandarin isn't as standard as most people believe anyway. It's more of an idealization that people aim at. With Cantonese, I think traditionally we kind of think of it as a two-city standard, and that's often in the literature. It talks about that a lot. And so, but it doesn't have the codification though, but the only thing you can talk about is in terms of the media, right? The media gives special place to Cantonese, and it's the only real variety, so-called dialect, that does have a robust media. I mean, you have a little bit in Shanghai and Taiwan and Taiwanese, and it's not the same. So you get that codification, but I don't think it's clear. I don't think it's obvious to say there's a clear standard. I think they sort of exist. Now, with respect to diaspora communities that I work with, I do work in Vietnam, in Cambodia, and Laos, and I've gone to the schools there, and the schools very consciously, most of the schools in Canton in Cambodia have adopted a sort of Hong Kong materials. Recently, however, with the influence of the Hanban and the Chinese fundings coming into some of those schools, and they're insisting on a little bit more materials from Guangzhou. So it's kind of a mixed bag even in that. And so I've noticed that, but generally speaking, it has a lot to do in the diaspora schools. The Cantonese schools, until the 1970s, there were Cantonese medium schools in Cambodia. And then after the Pol Pot revolution, they reopened them in Mandarin but the associations still deal in Cantonese. There's the Guangzhou, so the Jiaoxing, Jiaoxing, right? That's their standard originally. And so I think it's unclear. I think you talk about almost like two targets, and they're sort of they're not. It's not clear. It's not in policy in any place. So that's my best answer to that, which is kind of a non-answer.
Yeah, and Andrew, if you have anything to add to that, and let me kind of also go into the next question. Is like when people often think of Cantonese, they think of Hong Kong, right? But can you also talk a bit about your experiences with Cantonese outside of Hong Kong, as well as going back to the question about what is the quote unquote more standard version of Cantonese, if there even is one? Andrew?
Sorry, the question is, which question is it?
So, yeah, so when people often think of Cantonese, they think of Hong Kong. And can you talk a bit more about your experiences with Cantonese outside of Hong Kong, and also kind of what you also think about what is quote unquote the standard form of Cantonese, if there even is one, right?
It is hard to answer, as you know, Cantonese can it is affected by, Cantonese is a speaking form. It is always affected by the writing form, and like I'm teaching Chinese, here is many Chinese teaching material on my desk, and so if you talk about the standard form, accent will be a easier thing to understand. Like first we can divide into wordings and accent. For accent, in Hong Kong, I think there is a sort of standard accent. Like if people from the mainland China and they come to learn Cantonese, you can hear from their accent, and you would say that their accent is not that standard. But like wordings, we don't have something like standard wordings for Cantonese. So we have to clarify what we are talking about. Is it about accent, or is it about the writing form? And for the accent, like I totally agree with what Professor said, that it is influenced by media, especially Hong Kong's radio culture. Makes many Hong Kong people who were migrants learned Cantonese from radio. So our accent could be very likely unified. But for the wordings we use, we have variety of wordings, and I think variety is better than unified. In this case, we can use more different kind of words instead of a standard form of words to enrich our vocabularies, and this is good to don't have a standard to regulate what the wordings we use, unless like it is like lawmaking or any situation else. But for communication, I think for wordings we don't have to standardize it. But for accent, it is good to like there is a commercial need to standardize it for the television, for the radio, because they have to find a common accent to communicate with most of the audiences.
Just to follow up on that, if you think of this in terms of comparison, if somebody asks you what standard English is, I think some people would say, well, there's a North American standard and there's a British standard, and maybe there's, in the sociolinguistic literature now, we talk about world Englishes, plural. There are Englishes, there's not just one English. And so a British and an American can both recognize each other's standard. English is standard, but it's noticeably different. Likewise, with Mandarin, you can say Taiwan Guoyu and Beijing Northern Standard. They're both kind of considered, you could be a very educated speaker of either one and still be considered standard. So I think in a way it could be similar in Cantonese, where you can notice, yeah, you're from Guangzhou, you're an educated Guangzhou speaker, you're an educated Hong Kong speaker. You're both standard, but we're a little different.
I think there is good standard and bad standard. For good standard, if you adapt the standard, you can communicate with more people. You can make more people understand what you are talking about. It is determined by the people. But for the bad standard, like if you force the people to use like writing, in Hong Kong, I teach Chinese in Hong Kong. I'm a Chinese tutor. We cannot use Cantonese wordings in our Chinese writing. I think this is the bad standard. This is no good because it is affecting the variety of our creative writing, and this is no good. This is no good. So we have to, when we are talking about the standard, we have to know the reason why we are adapting the standards. This is the most important thing.
And Brittany, would you like to answer that as well? And I also kind of wanted you to pose kind of your perspective.
Yeah.
As...
Sure. I think, I love this conversation about standard, but I'll probably touch on it a little later in the questions that we have. But in terms of my experience, outside of Hong Kong, when I was little, I knew that was like a little different from my other Canadian classmates. And I thought it was super cool that I had like a secret language with my family. And so, as I got older, when I was little, I'm talking like when I was like 6 maybe, but of course, when I got older at like 12, starting to be a little bit more aware of these things, I started noticing that my Cantonese was very different from my Hong Kong cousins. And I became very, I wouldn't say very, but just like kind of embarrassed of my so-called Choksing accent. And I would try my darndest to like imitate how they spoke and like their accent, the way they would say things. And kind of touching back on what Professor Bourgerie said earlier is that like now, I'm older, I'm actually realizing like not to sweat the small stuff. And actually like, I'm like proud of that quote unquote Choksing accent that I have, because it does show, I speak Cantonese, but I'm not from the East. I'm from a diaspora community that I learned from my parents. And yeah, I sometimes say things that, are outdated from the 70s. My favorite story is how like up until like 2 years ago, I thought Russia was Solun, which is the Soviet Union, because my parents immigrated around that time that, that transition happened. And for the longest time, I was calling Russian people like Solunyan. And there's like, yeah, it's a little embarrassing, but I think it's kind of a little proud story of mine where it really like tells you like, this is who I am. And now I know it's not Solun, but so, yeah. And I think like, I just want to improve, like at this point, it's like about improving my Cantonese, being able to connect with my family. As many of you know, that's a big, big point of like just our culture, that we share regardless of where we are in the world, is that like, we love family. And being able to connect with my family better is what, Cantonese actually means to me.
Yeah, and building kind of off that question and going into the next, since you're a YouTuber, Brittany, how has social media accounts, podcasts, Facebook groups such as Save Cantonese, or YouTube channels, how has that contributed to Cantonese identity, whether that's preserving the language, culture, etc.? I know you do a lot of Cantonese teaching on yours.
Yeah, so I've actually, I guess you can say, moved away a little from the teaching, if you will, because, we're in the presence of people who actually are qualified to teach. And I've realized, you know, we should let the teachers teach. And those of us who want to entertain, well, that's like another way to, you know, if you want to preserve the language, is to make the language enjoyable, make the culture enjoyable. And social media, YouTube, podcasts, they've all been really, really amazing for, I would say, you know, to contribute to the Cantonese identity. I remember when I found like Cantomando, Wong Fu Productions, all those, like I could finally like relate to them. I felt like seen, you know, there's someone like just like me who's on media and all that kind of stuff, like Joksings. And now you've got new independent creators like Randy from Made with Lao, whose videos, I mean, he's doing amazing, reaching like millions of people. I've got friends from home who are like, Brittany, have you seen this video? I was like, that's amazing. Like Randy's coming to me all the way back from like friends, and his dad, he speaks Cantonese. I believe I think they're Taishanese, I believe, but you know, he speaks Cantonese in his videos and people love him. People love the mother. It's like, once again, family, that whole vibe of just like love and food, and you know, that's our culture, you know. And I think being able to reach all these platforms are able to reach something so big that I think our Saturday Cantonese schools didn't really have that kind of strength.
Yeah, and the next question that I actually wanted to pose to everyone is, what does Save Cantonese mean to you, right? And how can we facilitate the growth of Cantonese culture and language beyond just preservation, right? Like, how can we make Cantonese accessible and appealing? And if we feel that sharing is important to preserving it, right? And let me pass this off to Felix first.
Yeah, so I think that the Cantonese pop culture is very important. I met many people from mainland China on the internet that they express their thoughts on why they want to learn Cantonese. They I know certainly if they're actually learn Cantonese is another thing, but at least they have the intention to do so. And most of them are attracted by the Cantonese pop culture, especially Canton pop music. So I think the pop culture the pop culture does play a very important role, and especially for the younger generation. Yeah.
And Sunny, if you can go ahead and answer as well.
Yeah, sure. And then actually, I would love to, go back a little bit. Regarding,
Yeah, of course.
The standardization of Cantonese. I actually agree with many of the, other speakers that there should be no standardization of Cantonese, because we should embrace the variety and diversity of Cantonese, because just like, what Professor said, you have so many different accents of English, and also different, British and American, they also have their own, lifestyle on which kind of even like adjective they would use. One thing I observe, by observing Americans, and they will always say that magnificent as the adjective to describe the game. But when you are now in the United States, if you suddenly all of a sudden say that magnificent, people will find you very weird, because no one in America say this kind of adjective. And for example, in the last century, when if you were a British, and then you will say Merlin Spear instead of oh my God. And this kind of culture really successfully differentiate and actually substantiate the complexity and the diversity of your own culture, and there should be no standardization of that. And that's why this is also related to your following question: how to preserve? How to go beyond preserving Cantonese?
I think the one thing is that if we have a standardization of Cantonese, that will actually help. I would say, help. Have a crackdown on Cantonese. It is the key problem of right now, especially people who are in Guangdong. They encounter is that they can no longer speak this kind of language in a very public way or in a very widespread way. The last time I was in Guangzhou, taxi driver, and then I discussed the problem of Cantonese in Guangzhou province. And then he told me that because so many people outside of Guangdong province moving and relocating and immigrating to Guangdong, 外省人, 外省人, coming to Guangzhou, and that actually dilutes the culture and the demographic situation of Guangzhou. And very few people nowadays would say Cantonese in Guangzhou, and that's the problem. So we should not say that we should have a standardization of Cantonese. We should have a more variety. We should embrace and promote the variety of Cantonese and try to let more people understand the differences between different places. That would be nice. Because one thing that really annoys me is that if you watch, American Late Night Show, if you watch Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon, and then you can always find that Americans and British always try to mock each other in English. They publicly discuss the differences between British English, American English. They try to impersonate the counterpart's accent. They want to discuss, the differences and the funniest things of each other's English style. We seldom have the public domain to discuss the differences between different places, Cantonese. And that's why we cannot promote Cantonese in a more successful and captivating way. So that will be a problem.
Could I just add one short comment? I'm thinking from a pedagogical point of view, from a teaching point of view, you sort of have to start somewhere. I think the question is, how rigid should we be? And when we teach Cantonese, you have to say, well, you usually have a book, you have something to go by. And but I think it's a problem when we try to be too rigid about it, because there's a lot of variation internally. And I think that's part of it. And I think what I do and we do in our classes here is we just note, oh, here's this bride, this term is often used this place, this term is used that place, and let them do what they want. As long as they understand that it does sort of locate you a little bit, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think from a CBC or ABC, just as an overseas kid kind of perspective, is that I do recognize that having a standard would actually help in learning a lot. But I think at the same time, as many of the panelists have already said, having an actual standard would make it a lot harder for people to, I don't know, it just won't unify but I think from, how would I say, from my perspective, I think just if we can just have some fun doing it, and I don't know, I think that whole standard conversation is just so I kind of try to touch on this in my content where, not my parents, but some parents, they are always saying oh, it's nay, not lay. And I think as someone who grew up in overseas, that gave me so much anxiety about just speaking the language in general. And if we can somehow, I don't know, educate, influence, just encourage people to get rid of this kind of it's my way or the highway, it's there are several ways to speak it. I think as many of you have said, there are different ways to speak it. It makes it very interesting. There's a lot of variety. There's a lot of diversity. And I think that's great. Whether it's nay or lay, my husband, Jared, who does not have Chinese heritage, he understands both. And I don't think it's so different where it's oh, what you're saying, I don't understand. It is actually we can understand it. So I think somehow if we can just get rid of that and be able to embrace the variety and the diversity of Cantonese, which I think is amazing. Just see the panel right now. We have so many different kinds of Cantonese. going on here. And I think that's great. And that kind of like inclusivity makes it a lot more accessible. You know, we're always talking about how to preserve a language. And I think, you know, making it more entertaining, making it more accessible and inviting is definitely a big thing that I think, you know, I don't think people listen to K-pop, watch K-dramas, and eat Korean barbecue because they want to preserve Korean culture. I think they do it because they like it, you know. I like those things too. And I think the same thing about Cantonese culture. It's really important to highlight these good things. And that's kind of what I try to do with my channel, you know, enjoy the language and do fun things in the context of Cantonese, and hopefully other people would feel the same way.
And Andrew, if you have anything else.
Yeah, I have something to add on that. I just Professor bring us a very good point that he has shared his experience that many students were watch to Cantonese class because of the pop culture. I think this is important that we are not just thinking about protecting the language. If we are just thinking about protecting the language, this is not this cannot bring people into Cantonese class. People who don't know Cantonese would not go to Cantonese class only because they want to protect Cantonese. What's important is that we have to make them know that Cantonese is a beautiful language. It's a language that's worth learning. Like people in my age, they like to learn Japanese because they listen to many Japanese songs, they watch many Japanese animation, and this is good. And I think Cantonese pop songs is a very good point to cut in because Cantonese pop songs have Cantonese is a tone-like language. We use different tones to express meanings. So Cantonese pop songs it has a characteristic that we fill in the music notes according to the tones of the music notes, and I think this is very good point to cut in. And for what Save Cantonese mean to me is that we don't just in Hong Kong, it is a very different situation comparing to other places in the world, because in Hong Kong we can see that I just want to share some personal, not only personal, but from a Hong Kong perspective, we can see the status of Cantonese is indeed diminishing by the government. It is the fact. I can share some, let me see if I can share the screen, like, oh, I can't share the screen. But anyway, the government has recently, like Carrie Lam, our leader in Hong Kong, or the secretary for education in Hong Kong, they do not, in Hong Kong, they do not have they do not claim that they have a plan to diminish Cantonese. However, they say that Carrie Lam once answered a question. Somebody asked if she wants to diminish Cantonese. She answered that not now, but life is full of uncertainty. Like, I think Hong Kong is because there is seldom place in the world that have a formal, I can't say it is a formal education for Cantonese, because we have no Cantonese class in Hong Kong education system. But at least we use Cantonese as the medium of instruction in Hong Kong. So Save Cantonese, to me, in a Hong Kong perspective, is to at least preserve Cantonese as the medium of instruction. So students can learn Cantonese from the kindergarten, from our elementary schools, from our high schools, but moreover, we want to develop more we want to, we know life is full of uncertainty. We cannot persuade our government. We don't know, because we all know that China has the national language law. There is a contradiction for Hong Kong and China, is that in Hong Kong, Cantonese is the dominant language, but in the mainland China, the policy is to make Mandarin as the dominant language. This is contradictory, and we can see in the upcoming future, very likely, we cannot do many things on it. So I think it is good to think about strengthening the soft power of Cantonese. Like we can do more translation, and makes people who don't know Cantonese can also touch the beauty of Cantonese and learn how to appreciate the Cantonese culture. Thank you.
Yeah, and I saw a comment coming in from the chat from Raymond Pai. And he said, to go along with the discussion of the language standard issue, I believe language teaching and education can be reimagined. That teacher is often not the only source of knowledge. As a language teacher, learn a whole lot from my students about pop culture, slang, individual differences, etc. And I think that's a really important point to bring up. And the next question, or comes preface to the question, is someone submitted this for the forum as they were signing up, and they said, as a parent that is looking to pass Cantonese language and culture on, I noticed that there are a lot of individual efforts to develop and distribute teaching resources. However, there seems to be a huge divide where there's a bunch of resources for preschool and elementary school age children, then a bunch of resources for adult beginners, but not much for those in between. So how can we support the younger generation of heritage speakers who may only have a rudimentary understanding of the language, while giving the tools to their parents to help them develop their language skills further? And also, like, how would you get your children interested in learning Cantonese, right? Like, would you even teach your kids, is another question a lot of people face, especially in the West, especially in, like Canada, the US, and other Western countries. And how do we even get the younger generation to be engaged? Because like Brittany's experience, I think in the past, in a lot of ABCs, CBCs, you're embarrassed to speak Cantonese because your parents are like, hey, your Cantonese is so bad, just use English. Or you just are afraid of embarrassment by your peers, right? Who aren't particular Cantonese or Chinese even. And Brittany, if you want to start off that.
Sure. So first off, watch my channel. Just kidding. No, I'm not kidding. But how, in terms of passing it on, I mean, it's all about, I think, enjoying it. I don't think it should be anything that's too, pushed down your throat or too casual either. I mean, there is definitely a method, which, there are many linguists who have studied on this and how to get your children to do it. But, I do want my children to eventually learn Cantonese. And I think, how would I go about it? I mean, I think as long as you make it fun, you make it enjoyable, there's a lot of resources now out here that's come in the last 2 years. A lot of you who've been in the arena, I think 2 years ago when I started my channel, it was precisely for that reason, where there were a lot of preschool level Cantonese resources, and then it jumps to advanced stuff that even I don't understand. And my husband Jared kind of asked me oh, you've got some of this graphic design skill, let's make me some learning material. And so slowly we move towards this intermediate level kind of thing where, even the likes of me could kind of teach it, I guess, because I mean, I can speak it. It's just in terms of, learning material, I don't have that academic background. Whereas my husband, who worked at the United Nations as a translator, he has the experience of learning a language as an adult and working in it professionally too. So that was really helpful. And I mean, there are a lot of resources out there. I mean, I have like a blog article about some like great intermediate resources, friends of mine as well. A lot of you guys, I'm sure, know about Inspirlang, Jade, who runs that school. There's a lot of like podcasts. I mean, if you watch my channel or follow me on Instagram, I'm always on about podcasts. It's like a great way, if you don't get to speak often, is to just listen to people chat all the time. I love listening to Hong Kong people speak. I love listening to chatty Cantonese, which is amazing because they have transcripts too. So, I mean, for those of you who don't know, definitely jump on that. That's an amazing resource. And then there's also another great podcast called Us Mommios. And that one's a great one for moms or expecting moms. So, I mean, there are a lot of resources out there, and I really encourage people to not only use them, but also make your own if you feel like inclined to. I think it's like an amazing outlet for creativity, and it's been really great for myself as well. So I'd love for you guys to join this, our little circle of Cantonese entertainers, and yeah.
Yeah, and if Professor Bourgerie can talk more to that, because your kids know Cantonese, they grew up in Hong Kong.
I mean, it's what strikes me here is sometimes we worry too much. Bilingualism is a tough thing to maintain, but if it doesn't work perfectly, that's okay. I'm an example of a French heritage learner who spoke a lot of French very young. Thought I was embarrassed for a while because it was different. And then I found out that girls thought it was romantic, so that helped me to want to speak it again. And then I got involved in different things, and my family sent me to France for a little while, and it was bumpy and uneven, and I'm not as good as my father, but does that really matter very much? It's okay. And like with my own children, they forgot a lot of Cantonese, but then they got back into it later, and they say, oh, I love learning Cantonese, and I'm okay with all that. So if it's not the perfect path to professional fluency, I don't think that's a terrible thing. I think I'm okay with that. Second thing I have to say that I've been involved in the Utah immersion programs for Mandarin, and they're integrated throughout the state, but as soon as they hit 7th grade, they tend to crash. And so they're all getting prepared for advanced placement in college, but they have bridge classes, but they're hard because at a certain age, your kid gets more independent, right? They said, Ma, I don't want to do that, I think, and then it's a slog. When they're 5 years old, you can pretty much tell them you have to go to that school or a heritage school or whatever. But again, I think if we focus more positively and saying it's a good thing that they're learning Cantonese, that's really great. You can find different hooks. My daughter got more interested in French again because she liked fashion. And so we had French fashion magazines. So I'd find her poring over French fashion and reading magazines in French. And I go, okay, that's her hook. Canto Pop's somebody else's hook. If you can find a hook like that just says that they want to do stuff in it and not just slog through an academic course.
Yeah, and if Andrew, Felix, or Sunny have anything to add to that.
I think that the point is we do not laugh at, because I have seen a comment in the comment section that talking about discrimination about Cantonese in Malaysia. I think that when we want to encourage people to learn Cantonese, especially young people, we do not try to discriminate them by accent or wordings. In Hong Kong, when I teach my students, I teach Chinese because Chinese is the subject in the public exam, not Cantonese definitely. Sometimes they learn Chinese with Mandarin in the school. So I have to teach them how to speak Cantonese, and I try to encourage them, and I try to, how do I teach them is that I play many Hong Kong Cantonese films to them, like Stephen Chow, many funny Hong Kong films, and like Cantonese pop song. I always send them Cantonese pop songs, and I also use slangs to them. But it is very bad that in our education system we discourage students, our next generation, to use Cantonese by giving them low marks when they use Cantonese wordings in their essays, in their homeworks, and in the public exam. I think this is the problem. But for family education, there is low marks in family education. I think like in the family days, family time, you can play more Cantonese films. You can pick up, because Cantonese film, maybe some Cantonese film is not suitable for children, but many of them are good ones, and we can show them. I think even people whose mother tongue are not Cantonese, they still like them. I think they are very good one, and try to explain to them, explain the lyrics to them, explain the words within the Cantonese song to them, and these are the good approach to talk about Cantonese with young people, younger people, I mean.
Yes, and then I would love to follow up with Andrew, and then I agree with Andrew, and then especially talking about the pop culture, I think we definitely should support the Mira, a very leading young boy brand, a band in Hong Kong, because I think we have to let our next generation to know that learning Cantonese and practicing Cantonese is a very cool stuff. The reason why many people are now learning Korean because they love BTS. BTS is a global phenomenon that's really, went really wired. I mean, even in the US. So if we have a very cool band, if we have a very cool Hong Kong movie star, and that can really appeal to the younger generation, and we should embrace that, and we should help promote this kind of culture. I mean, for daily family education or for other platforms. And one thing I would love to bring in is that previously, the one thing that I really enjoy Cantonese, I mean, despite because I was born in Hong Kong and grew up using Cantonese, is that I enjoy watching stand-up comedy. Dong Dok Siu is one of the most funniest thing, and the one thing we should appreciate. If we have someone using Cantonese to do our own stand-up comedy, and the younger generation, if they understand that, they will also find it really funny, because I mean, using your mother tongue to understand a stand-up comedy can be the most expressive and local thing to do. And this is one thing. And my last remark is that because I mean, when I was studying high school in Hong Kong, I pay a lot of debating competition. So I use Cantonese to pay a lot of debating competition. And one thing I find out is that, I mean, compared with the Putonghua debating competition, Putonghua debating competition, they always have the winner to do more cool stuff. For example, they have some annual world Putonghua debating competition organized in Malaysia. And my friends who play Putonghua debate can go to Malaysia and to play with some global teams together to fight for the championship. However, I think we never have this kind of Cantonese public speaking competition or oral competition or debating competition. Why don't we, when 10 of millions of people in the world are practicing Cantonese, why don't we urge our next generation to use Cantonese or organize this kind of large scale Cantonese debating competition or this kind of stuff, and then try to make it globally to become a really remarkable and landmark event. And this kind of thing can also try to motivate our next generation and make them feel that, okay, wow, learning Cantonese is cool. I can go to Malaysia, I can go to Vancouver to play global annual debating competition, and you have award. And this kind of stuff should be organized. I mean, from my perspective. So yeah, I mean, that's it. Thank you.
I just want to add one more perspective, as I have seen in the comment section. And Cantonese playground games are something that we have, or we always neglect. Like if you your mother tongue is Cantonese, you will understand what I'm talking about. Like 氹氹轉菊花園, like 猜情尋. Many Cantonese kids game there are a lot of resources about Cantonese playground game in the past. I remember when I was in kindergarten, they teach those games in a very formal ways, and we like using songs to teach kids to play those games. And I think it is good, but the problem is in the COVID-19, after the COVID-19, the world has changes, and the children can very less to meet together, and there are really there are seldom resources for children to learn Cantonese in a more funny way. And I think it is important, like to put and produce more Cantonese playground games or children preschool education resources on the internet. This is very helpful, and many moms are more than willing to find them to play them to their children.
Yeah, I think Andrew and Sunny brought a fantastic point. Like, we can promote something like Cantonese debating competition, and I want to mention that in Guangzhou there is also many something like talk show and short video on TikTok about Cantonese showing up, and that captures a lot of attention from the northern China. So that's a good sign, and it's also a process of rebuilding up the Cantonese identity in the Guangdong province. And I also like to know that the situation of Cantonese in Guangzhou is bad compared to the peripheral area of Guangzhou, other places in Guangdong province, because about 1/3 of the population of Guangzhou is not from the Guangdong province, and so many Guangzhou people are forced to speak Mandarin with them. And however, at the peripheral areas of Guangzhou, like Foshan, Xiuguan, Qingyun, and other places in Guangdong province, the Cantonese is still a very strong language compared to Mandarin. So people there are not quitting, but they're shifting their language from their own, let's say, minor Cantonese dialects or not necessarily Cantonese or other minor languages to Cantonese. So more and more people in Guangdong province speak Cantonese, but you know, Guangzhou is a big city and a lot of migrant people. So the situation in Guangzhou would be a bit worse compared to other places in Guangdong province. Yes.
And does anyone else have anything else to add to this particular topic before we jump into the next one?
Just a word about status. I do a seminar on dialects and minority languages, and what's striking, if you look at the official law on language policy, it writes in, even though it's not widely supported, it writes in special considerations for minority languages, but not dialects. So Mongolian has a specific status, but Cantonese does not. So that's kind of telling too, in a way. And so Cantonese has survived despite that. And I just want to make a last comment. I see some of these things about debates, and I think we're in a position with virtual ability to do more of this before. If you think about, we have about 20 programs in the United States and 3 or 4 at college level in Canada. And that's not really very many to support a national debate process but if you could do it virtually, maybe we could. So that's, I think, a reason why we need more connections between the various programs and colleges that do teach it and support it.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of hopping into a more fun question before we wrap up this portion and go into Q&A. What are some of your favorite Cantonese movies, songs, media, food, and what role can, like entertainment, food, etc., play in preserving Cantonese? For me personally, I'm a huge Gern Kong. I really like Gern To. I also just really love Don Ta and Dim Sum and like Po Ta. I love eating. I love like entertainment and everything. So let me pass this question over to Brittany first.
Cool. Well, in terms of media, I mean, I'm going to say YouTube. I personally love Zhao Xingqi's movies. Like, I don't know if it's a cultural thing or what, but like his stupid humor or like Mo Lei Tao kind of humor is just like, it gets me every time. And, sometimes my husband doesn't understand, but like poop on someone's face or his back is hilarious. I really like that. And yeah, I mean, I saw someone also in the comments saying how like Made with Lao is one of their, polls. And I feel similarly to that. I've made several of his, their recipes. I think like you said, food. I mean, that's another cultural thing. Love food, love making food, love eating food, love serving food, love taking pictures of food. Another one is Hambalang for my husband, actually. He's the one who found it. And I think that is one of the greatest resources to come out in the last 2 years. And I think like just being able to, it's even helped me learn how to read. And I think that was we wake up every Sunday to like watch their new videos. Touching back on just like culture, I think like Canto Mando, love their stuff. I love their like Cantonese challenges where they try to get their Mandarin speaking friend to do something while speaking to him in Cantonese, like building IKEA furniture or something. I thought that was really fun. Stuff that you can focus even on grammar, even though sometimes like grammar can be very intimidating, I guess, but there are resources out there that make it easy to understand, interesting and fun. As I mentioned, Chatty Cantonese has an amazing resource with their transcripts and their podcasts, bilingual, and then also Cantonese Corner on YouTube. I think like just, I say it on my channel all the time. It's like podcasts as well. There's a lot of podcasters coming out of Hong Kong, as well as like in the diaspora community. I know there's like a few like in East Coast of Canada as well as the US. And we've got like, I think, there's one from Boston and moms, all sorts of different varieties and topics. And once again, I would really encourage anyone who has something to say to definitely, try to make stuff, because we were saying like this soft power is very important for not just the preservation of Cantonese, but more so just the overall enjoyment. And if people are enjoying it, the love's going to spread. And that's kind of how I want to see Cantonese grow. I want to see it grow through love. I don't want it to be through, this is the only way to speak it. My way is the only way. I want it to be, I love the language and I want to share that love with my children. I want to share it with my friends. I want to share it with my audience. And yeah, I think that's how media through love Cantonese will persevere.
And let me pass this over to Andrew to answer next. So the question again was favorite Cantonese, these songs, media, food, and what role do you think entertainment / food, etc. can play in preserving Cantonese identity?
Oh, for the my favorite is I like reading, but my favorite Cantonese song so it is the song written by Lim Zik. Like although I like Eason Chan very much, although now he's not that welcomed by Hong Kongers, but I like Eason Chan so much. But now we have Lim Ga Him. What is Lim Ga Him English name? Whatever, but
His name is Terrace Lam.
Right, Terence Lam, right. And I love Cantonese songs more than movies or any other form, because I think Cantonese songs are creative, and it is very amazing that there is a form that it perfectly matches the expression of the characteristic of Cantonese, that Cantonese have different kind of tones to match different kind of meanings, and every word have different meaning, and Cantonese itself is like music, and music, feeling Cantonese lyrics with music is really enjoyable to me. So I love to read and listen to Cantonese music. I think it is a good concept that we can take it serious as literature. Different culture, they have different kind of literature. In some culture, drama, script writing is their literature. Some people say Hong Kong has no literature. I don't agree with such a viewpoint, because Hong Kong has its literature in formal Chinese, and more than those traditional literature, I think Cantonese song itself is like the literature of Hong Kong. Maybe some people cannot imagine the Cantonese songs as an literature, but it is indeed like to Mongolian. The Mongolian songs are their literature. It is what I like Leslie very much too, and I think it is very high developed kind of literature. I love to learn like the Buddhism, so much cultural things inside preserved well in Cantonese songs. So I love every Cantonese songs, but especially Lim Zik's song.
I'm actually a fan of Terence Lam from Ga Him. Yeah, and I think the Hong Kong Cantopop culture is still very influential in Guangzhou. Like few weeks ago, the birthday of Gang Tao, there are people celebrating his birthday in Guangzhou, and also people have busking in Guangzhou. They can call out hundreds of people singing the new Cantopop song, and yeah, that's amazing. And I think the Cantonese identity is not only about the language, but also about many other things, like the foods we eat and the customs we follow, and many other things. And yeah, I didn't realize that after I leave Guangzhou. Yeah.
Professor Brittany?
I'm thinking more, maybe because it's dinner time, but I'm thinking more food. I absolutely love traditional old school Cantonese tea houses in Hong Kong. It's the first thing I do when I go there. I'm on the plane, I'm thinking of it, and I plan out my schedule that I'm going to go to one in not the fancy ones, but the old school working class ones that are so good. And I love that. And I also I love Cantonese siuyo. So one of my favorite little everyday comfort foods is chasio, cha gai fan. And so it's just really simple, and I just love it. I love those little barbecue places. I have my favorite ones around Hong Kong, and I always go. And even though I don't go so much, they know me because they're not used to having a guaylo come to their stand. But Cantonese food, I think it's the best of all Chinese food.
You heard it here.
And I've
Sunny.
had a lot of Chinese food throughout China, but I still like Cantonese food the best. It's got so much variety and freshness, and it's wonderful.
And Sunny, I think you're the last one to answer that question.
Sure. First of all, I'm also a big Deng Tong. I love Deng Tong very much. And it seems that, I mean, he's going to the US in the late May. I'm really curious, I mean, which city he is going. I would definitely go there too. And then to Joycing. So yeah, I mean, I love this kind of Hong Kong movie stars and singers very much. And the most optimistic side and promising side is that I do witness a rejuvenation and revival of Hong Kong culture or Cantonese culture coming back in recent years, both in movies and also songs. And that's why, yeah, I strongly advocate people to notice the Mirror, to observe and support the Mirror, this very good band. And also, from my perspective, I think one thing that I would love to flag is that we should also support and try to notice the Canton hip hop rap. One of the most famous and reputable band is LMF. LMF, I love it very much because they use Cantonese to rap. And of course, I mean, they use Cantonese songs and their lyrics to touch on many social issues. And I think using Cantonese rap is a very cool stuff to do. And I really encourage people to also try to compile more or try to support Cantonese rap and hip hop more. And despite this kind of stuff, and then also we should also support the movies coming out. I think we should also support Gu Tianlok, because he established a very successful Hong Kong his English name should be Louis Koo. And then the movie company he helped establish is Thiên Hà Yat. I'm not sure what is the English name of that, but Thiên Hà Yat. And they are going to produce a lot of high quality Hong Kong movies and using Cantonese, and that we should all support that. And yeah, I mean, so basically just enjoy the movies and also try to be part of this kind of rejuvenation and revival of Hong Kong and Cantonese pop culture. I think the future will be quite promising. And on the other hand, we should also try our best try to promote this pop culture to our next generation in overseas, and also try to make a more large scale and feasible events together to assemble each other. I think that will be a very good start.
Yeah, thank you. And kind of leading into the next question that's starting our Q&A. Someone asked recently, we have seen more Hollywood movies having Cantonese implemented in their scripts. So I'm thinking these are films like Turning Red, Crazy Rich Asians, right? And more authentically in these films, rather kind of than in the past. And how do we keep this progress sustainable? If anyone wants to take that question away. Brittany?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, how to make that more sustainable. I mean, I love to hear that you know, Cantonese is peeking out in Hollywood. I know there are many Asian or Chinese Malaysian Chinese, Singaporean Chinese actors who speak Cantonese, and I think it's great. You know, bolster those who are in the entertainment industry in the West, in Hollywood. I think our culture and what we stand for is really worth celebrating. And I, personally, I also like support these actors and hope to see more of them. I think Jimmy O Yang too recently did a reel about like Sing Zhao Cao Min. I didn't know he spoke Cantonese this whole time, and I was like, whoa, did he just say Sing Zhao Cao Min? And like that, like I just that one word, I felt like, oh my gosh, he's one of us. That's so cool, And I think, if we can get more of those guys out there, I don't know how I would do it, but it's encouraging to see, and I hope, if that's what you strive for, to also go down that route. I support you. I'll watch your movies. That's all.
And does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I would like to talk about it in a more analytical approach. That there are really more Hollywood movies that adapt Cantonese dialogue, but I think the reason behind is that because the mainland China bans the Hollywood movie very much, so they will try to attract more Cantonese markets in Malaysia, in Hong Kong, in Macau, or elsewhere. But you can see it is really the Western world start to know more about Chinese people. They actually have people speaking Cantonese and people speaking Mandarin. I think it is good to know that there is a difference between them, and I think the best way for us to make them make the Hollywood producer to adapt more Cantonese is to use our persuading power to encourage them to do more. And we can, if we comment in our comments, we appreciate that it is a positive feedback to encourage movie producers or the producers worldwide to adapt more Cantonese. It is good, just like Miwa in Hong Kong, Gernto in Hong Kong. Gernto is a famous singer in Hong Kong, and their fans how to make Gernto be seen in more occasions is that their fans are really have a good quality. Their fans go to the Instagram of the shops and comment to thank you the shops that who employ Gernto as the representative. So we can also we can learn from the Gernto's fans. We can, if you see the movies, you see them using Cantonese or any art forms, art creation using Cantonese, we can be a good quality Cantonese fans. We can comment and say, oh, thank you, we really appreciate that. Don't just appreciate them in hearts, but we can take in action to appreciate the adaptation of Cantonese.
I think also kind of supporting independent creators, independent artists. One Cantonese, also CBC artist that I'm a personal fan and friend of is Leslie Kwan. And I believe he was like a former wushu, like he represented Canada, I believe. And, he's a choreographer, so he does a lot of very really cool, fight scenes and that kind of stuff. And he also acts in Cantonese too, I believe. And, if anyone knows of any, budding creators, budding actors, I'd love to know more about them too, because it's if we support them, that's how supporting the independent creators and the independent movie makers, filmmakers, they will be the ones who have more, maybe more flexibility to make movies in Cantonese, and that's where Hollywood will pick them up. You know, if we give them that platform at the independent level to then get picked up by the bigger guys, I think that'd be great. And, you know, Leslie, for one, is, I think, a very good example. He not only, you know, is a good actor, can speak Cantonese, but he's a professional wushuist, a fighter, artist, I guess. And I think that's another representation of our culture, which is worth celebrating. So yeah, if anyone in the chats wants to share independent creators, independent like actors, filmmakers, I'd love to know and support them.
Yeah, I would love to add on that because I mean I'm going to leave early. Sorry about that. And then first of all, I think if many of you have might notice that previously in London, there was the first Hong Kong Film Festival in London. Many great Hong Kong movies are being displayed in London, Manchester, attracting so many Hong Kong diaspora or people from who understand Cantonese or enjoy Hong Kong movies. They also, I mean, visited. They participated in the Hong Kong Film Festival, and that was a brilliant flagship initiative. Hong Kong movies, Hong Kong culture, or Cantonese culture have been really widespread. I mean, since the last century, before the rise of K-pop. And actually, I mean, when I live in the US now, every time I talk to an American, they might be able to know, they might watch a Hong Kong movie in their lifetime when they were small. So they know the legacy, they understand the history of Hong Kong movies. They just want to know what is the latest situation of Hong Kong movies. So if we have this kind of film festival, or even music festival, not necessarily to be very large scale one, you can organize a very local community screening. But if you can, invite your friends, foreigners to join the screenings and help promote the Cantonese culture, that will be awesome. And that will be also something very doable, practical, and also incremental in the long run. Because as long as if you organize this kind of stuff and try to assemble a group of audience, and then as time goes by, and then we can successfully, try to promote this culture to more audience. So yeah, I will finish here, and then my last remark is that thank you for having me, and it's really my honor to participate in this panel with very distinguished speakers in this panel. And to be honest, I've joined a lot of panels regarding Hong Kong democracy, something like that. I've spoken a lot regarding this, but this is my first time to discuss Cantonese, and this is much needed. I think this is very, very brilliant idea, and even more than 100 people actively, watching this online webinar. This really encouraged me, and this is really powerful. I think I'm really happy to know that so many people are so eager to protect Cantonese and so interested in learning more about Cantonese. So I hope this conversation can keep going, keep alive. Please feel free to reach out to me, and thank you so much for all the people here to protect Cantonese. And we hope that we can witness a more successful Cantonese culture very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us, Sunny. It's a pleasure really to have you on this panel as well. And
Thank you.
Have a really good night. And did anyone have anything else to add to that question? If not, we'll move on to the next. All right. So the next question that we have in the Q&A is, can you speak to the role of script in Cantonese identity? And to what extent is the use of traditional versus simplified characters and or special Cantonese specific characters impactful on both preserving Cantonese language as well as developing its identity? If anyone wants to take that one away, thank you.
I had some notes on that one. It's one of my jobs is I'm the editor of Chinese as Second Language. It's a broader journal, and some of you know Hugo Tam. He's been active in promoting Cantonese, and we recently published a piece that was it was controversial. He submitted it totally in Cantonese vernacular characters, but only about 5% of our readership could understand it. So I said he have to put the topic in standard writing, which he calls Mandarin writing. So this is what you're getting at. Maybe Hugo's joining this now, but what we did is we actually published as an addendum or a supplement offline, but it's on the John Benjamin site. And as far as I know, it's the only academic paper that I know of that's ever been published in Cantonese characters. And so that's a very controversial thing. And I think, as Andrew had sort of talked to, he's not sure about that kind of situation, but a lot of programs don't deal with writing at all, script at all, just because depending on their audience, they just say, well, we just want to deal with speaking. Others, like our program, treat it as a general education requirement. So what that means is they have to do what let's say a Hong Kong Cantonese would do. They would have to speak Cantonese and they have to be able to write in standard Chinese. And also probably be aware of this vernacular characters that are found in comic books and informal stuff and advertising. So, but there's a lot of talk among teacher programs in the United States, for example, whether or not you should teach those non-standard characters at all. And so it's a fairly controversial topic, but there's a lot of talk about it right now among linguists. There's a hand up there.
Yes, and Brittany, you had a hand up.
Yes, I just kind of want to talk a little bit on, like, from the perspective of a Cantonese learner. I mean, I think having spoken Cantonese written down is very important for my learning, especially those Cantonese specific characters. I'll talk to some native family members and it's like, oh, there's no character for that, you can't write it. And it's like, then how do I look it up? How do I save it for next time? And I think having those things for slang, for, we talk about preservation of the slang, of the expressions, all those kinds of things. I guess we kind of need the characters. And I think, like, having the spoken version of Cantonese written down is, like, it helps me at my level now to learn better my Cantonese. For example, like the Resonate magazine. I don't know if you guys have seen it or read it, but I think that's like a great initiative. I love that. Some of my older videos, I mean, the videos that I do have subtitles for, they're all in exactly what I say. And I think, like, in terms of from like a learning perspective, it's a lot less confusing than seeing standard Chinese and being like, so which word goes with what they just said? They didn't really say it like that. And I think it plays a big role in at least like the preservation aspect of the language. Thank you.
And I just, as a follow-up, I think that's right. And I think our point of view is that we just try to make them understand the reality of how they're used. I mean, many of bewildered mainland Chinese has come to Hong Kong and couldn't understand the subway signs, the advertising in the noodle shops, but they are used, right? There's an important book called Written Cantonese by Donald Snow, and he discusses and gives the history of the written Cantonese system. Now, I think you have to make a person understand that you wouldn't write a essay normally, except now we know that Hugo Tam does, and so at least some people are trying to say that this is legitimate for higher level as well. But I think as long as people understand the use, I think that's the most important thing.
This question was very controversial 10 years ago, like how to write Cantonese things. But with the development of the internet, I think this, when people write more and more about Cantonese, these many problems can be solved, like how to write certain words, like the mouth 口字部, the mouth 口字部, many difficulties was happen in writing Cantonese, but it was solved with the development of the internet. I think it helps a lot in developing script writing, the role of script in Cantonese. And yeah, nowadays the adoption of Cantonese writing is very familiar, especially just like Professor said, in the advertisement, and very common in Hong Kong. Everywhere there are Cantonese specific characters, but I think to preserve, from a preserving approach, I think it is good to, as I see some people, they are working on making dictionaries and like literature magazine. Those are good ways to preserve, and I think it is very important to put them on the internet so that people can learn, can trace back, can Google the meanings of the Cantonese words easily. It is a very important approach to develop writing nowadays, because now we human beings are putting our words not using paper and pencil or pen. We are now using computer, so we should put many things, many Cantonese things on the internet as possible. I think the first thing is that we do Cantonese magazine, but the more important, I think, is to convert the things in a cyber form so that people can learn Cantonese and trace back what does it mean easily. And also many Cantonese heritage that haven't you cannot search them on the internet. So if you have time, if you have resources, I encourage you to put like old ancient, not really ancient, but many Cantonese texts was Cantonese novels. Cantonese actually Cantonese literature was not a new idea. It was well developed from the 1980s. So if you see a Cantonese book on the bookshelf with many Cantonese words, I think you should try to share it, input it in a cyber way, in the computer form. I think it will be very good for Cantonese development.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I think there's some people in Hong Kong are working on Cantonese dictionary. I mean, using Cantonese to explain the words. Yutin, Yutin.net. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty inspiring idea that we can explore the usage of Cantonese in different scenarios, and not only speaking the language, but also like use it in dictionary, in literature, like the magazine Brittany mentioned, Resonate. Yeah, and can I have a following question for other speakers? Yeah, so I noticed in Brittany's videos, you use Yupeng as your caption of your videos, and why do you choose Yupeng? And I also want to know, for Andrew and Professor Bourgerie, when you teach Cantonese, what kind of romanization system do you use and why do you pick it?
So I'll answer your question first about why I use Yuping in some of my earlier videos. It's precisely for those of us like myself who grew up speaking but didn't learn how to read. And so I went to Chinese school for about like a year and gave up when I was like 5, and I barely absorbed any reading, nothing further than like Sao, Hao. I don't even think I remember Yi, but I couldn't read. So how do I take my language skills to the next level where I can speak at a relatively like family conversation level to the next level where I can speak to someone in Hong Kong without like feeling anxious? And the very important piece of that puzzle was romanization of Cantonese language. And I think Yuping is a very good tool. I mean, of course, there's a debate whether like it's the best romanization, but the fact that there is a romanization, I'm very happy about it. That's how I took my my Cantonese from 2 years ago to where it's now, is that like I can actually read to a maybe like 3rd grader, 4th grader level. There are tools on Chrome that can help me. I'll like hover over some Chinese characters and it'll show me the Yuping and I'll be like, oh, that's the word for joke, for example, and I'll know, and then I can by context understand the rest of the characters. And I think I have been able to learn maybe at least another like 500 to 600 characters in the last 2 years, like at a pretty passive, like not pretty passive level, but like, I wasn't like really immersed into my learning, but just through the having Yuping and doing that for my videos, it's helped a lot. And I think a lot of heritage learners like myself find Yuping or any kind of romanization to be very, very helpful, and which is why I added them in my video so that others could use it as a learning tool.
There's a lot of research on romanizations in Mandarin, and it turns out it doesn't really matter which one you use very much, as long as you're comfortable with it. And in my text, I used Yale just because Yuping hadn't been fully developed yet. And in fact, Yuping isn't terribly different from Yale's, but in the end, people get used to it pretty quickly, and it has its role. And it can't be perfect. You still have to use audio as a primary, but as a guideline, it works. And so, we're lucky that when I started learning Mandarin, there was like 5 romanizations, and you never knew which one you were going to get. So, but I think it's helpful. And as long as you understand that you can't learn to speak Cantonese simply by romanization. You have to have audio.
And for me, I use different kind of method. Yuping may be the most frequently used, but it depends on the student indeed. The student maybe, I have taught some students whose mother tongue Mandarin, and they use Mandarin to input Chinese characters in the computer. And Apple have different kind of input method. I mean, iPhones, they have different kind of input methods, and they have pinyin, and they use pinyin to type Cantonese in the Apple keyboard. And sometimes I even use Mandarin. I don't mind. I think whatever it is the best for the student, we adapt it. Just like Professor said, that there are not really a difference. It depends. It really depends on the student. But for a Hong Kongers, pinyin, Yuping is good because Yuping can correct their make them emphasize. They can read Yuping more easily, and they can know what is the characteristic of the word. But I use really a variety of teaching method. I even use very ancient method like 切音 just tell them to combine two Cantonese words together to become one Cantonese word. I even use this method. Whatever makes the students feel good and they can learn well, I use them. So I think Yupeng is good, but it doesn't really matter to. There is not really a best method in this question. For this question,
I think the main point is with Yupeng, if I were redoing it, I might go with Yupeng just because reference books are now more using Yupeng. When I first started doing the text, the Yale was where the reference works, where I mean, Pleco has Yupeng and a lot of the newer stuff has it. But so that's the main reason of having a consistent romanization is you have access to those resources.
Well, the good point is that if it have really a pronunciation in the computer, that's the best one.
Yeah, that's the best.
That's the best.
And Pleco, of course, it's good because it does have the Cantonese pronunciation for the word. So if you can look them up, but if you don't know how to, the input system is the issue, right? But unless you use Shouxie or Saoxie, and most beginners don't know how to do handwriting, so that's not very helpful.
That's the most difficult part for a long Chinese.
It's useful for Mandarin learners who are trying to learn Cantonese, which we have quite a few of those. I was going to mention that earlier. That's another phenomenon that we haven't talked about very much. That probably a quarter of my students are Mandarin speakers who plan to spend time in Hong Kong or Macau or someplace like that, and they want to learn Cantonese. So that's more common than I think we're guessing.
Kind of moving into the last question before we wrap up, we've talked about preserving Cantonese, especially through like pop culture, and a lot of these suggestions are more, contemporary in the past decade or two. But how about looking into like Cantonese literature, linguistic studies, opera, etc.? And is it harder, easier to use these mediums to also like preserve them as well? Is it also maybe like a generational gap issue, do you guys think?
Maybe could you restate the question?
Yeah, like, so are there, like, I mean, we've mentioned like Cantopop as kind of an instigator, right, of preserving Cantonese because it's like people will like it because it's like a hobby, it's music, right? But it's definitely kind of harder in the realm of, say, like Cantonese opera. I mean, I grew up with Cantonese opera. My grandparents listened to it all the time. And like literature and linguistic studies. But is there like maybe a revival in kind of those spheres as well, do you think? Because it's not as popular in kind of like in the modern day.
I posted a link to Marjorie Chen's site at Ohio State. She teaches a class on Chinese opera that includes a significant section on Cantonese opera. And if you look at the history of Beijing opera, it's almost died. And then it got picked up again in a different form by TV, in kind of a form that the purists really hated. But it actually reintroduced it to younger people, and they started seeing an uptick in use. And so you never know. Sometimes we think something's dying, and it has a revival for reasons that are hard to predict or even plan for. So I haven't looked at that specifically. That's something I might ask Marjorie about because she's tracking that pretty closely.
And as we head into our last question, the last question of the day would be kind of just your final thoughts that you'd like to say to the Cantonese community and or people in general, right, who are working on preserving identity and language, right? And what are some resources that you guys have found helpful? And I know Brittany's mentioned quite a bit, and everyone here has kind of dropped their sources, but anything that kind of comes to mind?
So in terms of, final thoughts, I think through my work, through my channel, and something I try to do in my everyday life is just to channel a more positive and I think uplifting outlook on how we see Cantonese, how we use Cantonese, and if we can go into it with love and with, acceptance and inclusivity, I think we'll bring a lot of people in. We'll bring back people who might have felt ashamed to speak it before. And I hope to show people, like, through my work that, my Cantonese isn't quote unquote perfect, but I still enjoy doing things Cantonese related in the context of Cantonese language and culture. And it's okay for you to too. I think particularly to the ABCs, CBCs, overseas kids who are watching this today, I think there's never been a better time to learn, relearn, pick it up. You guys can definitely do it. It just takes just that 1% a day is going to accrue into a big improvement over time, and keep at it. We're all here for you. And, there's a lot of communities out there that do it together, and Gaia.
Kimberly, I think what's been done right tonight is a good step. I mean, one thing when you talk about less commonly taught languages and commonly used is people feel isolated. And then you realize there's a lot of people out there for their own reasons really want to learn it. And when we were developing immersion programs in this state here, we found out that there were all kinds of reasons for people wanting their kids to learn Chinese. And then we decided it really doesn't matter. One person might have their reasons, another person has a totally different reason. Somebody like Canto Pop, some people like martial arts, some people like food. And it doesn't matter whatever your reasons, if you love and interest in the culture and you bring it all together. I think that's the most important. And in what you're doing today, and maybe I hope there's some follow-ups on these kind of things, but with all the comments that are in the chat, you can tell there's a lot of energy out there. And we just have to harness it and keep a communication. So you don't feel like you're just a loner out there on the prairie somewhere.
Andrew.
Yes,
Felix?
I agree that the reason matters the most. No. I mean, what I mean is that the reason, is that we do not try to see Cantonese as only a tool or something that you have to protect. It is very heavy. Although I agree that definitely Cantonese have to protect. We have many things happens for Cantonese, but do not forget that what we are protecting is not only a tool, but the values, the things, many stuff, the food, the songs, many stuff we love that is inside Cantonese, and we want to share them to other people. So that is the reason that we want to protect Cantonese, and we always forget about it, and this is a good opportunity for us to discuss about it and to appreciate it in a better way. And I want to do a bit advertisement because I haven't introduced my organization very well. I am now doing 港語學. 港語學 in Hong Kong is a registered organization which has many troubles in Hong Kong regulations and faces many crises because, as I have introduced, that Hong Kong is a Cantonese dominant society, and we are facing the many changes and many difficulties in Hong Kong. But there is still hope, and I think it is very good to see you guys overseas. That I can see there is hope, and with worldwide connection, we can do Cantonese campaign better and in a more better and better way. I don't know what to say, but thank you for your invitation. I hope I'm really looking forward for more and more activities like this, and not just discuss about Cantonese, but also we make more stuff together. We are not just discuss this is Cantonese, this is important Cantonese, and we have to protect Cantonese. We can share more Cantonese good stuff like today we share many links, many music links, many video clips links. This is really good way to do so. Like it is a platform. Cantonese itself is a platform for us to share the things we love and we like. So 都係加油啦，都係加油啦。Thank you everyone for attending these meetings.
Yeah, and Felix for your last words.
Yeah, I think to be conscious about the problems we are facing now is the first step. And like Professor Boudry said, we need to connect to people, other people using Cantonese, and not to be isolated. That's really important to keep the momentum. And yeah, that's about it. And thank you for having me, and thank you guys for attending today. Yeah.
Thank you, Felix. And before we wrap it up, I just want all the panelists who are here and kind of everyone who's behind the scenes to turn their camera on. We're going to take a picture after this. But huge shout out to the team, Save Cantonese and HKAAB, because they've been back behind the scenes, answering your questions, making sure like tech runs smoothly. So a huge shout out to them. And really, thank you so much to the panelists for joining us today. And also thank you to the audience. There's definitely a huge conversation, I think, about a topic like this. And there's also many more to come, right? And you can go ahead and fill out the exit survey that was in the chat. We really appreciate it. We'd want to do a lot of other future programming. And we love to hear your thoughts. And until next time, thank you so much for joining us. And I think it is picture time for us. Let's see if I can get a screenshot of this. I'm gonna stop the recording.